Hi, and welcome to Parent Unplugged podcast. If you're finding these episodes helpful, make sure you hit the subscribe so you don't miss out on what's coming next. Today, I'm chatting with Vikki Rose, a brilliant baby sleep coach who supports families with kind, realistic sleep advice. If you're feeling exhausted or just unsure where to start with baby sleep, Vikki brings so much reassurance and practical help. I'm joined by Vikki Rose today, who's a baby sleep coach and an antenatal teacher. So if you wouldn't mind, start by telling us a little bit about what you do for the listeners today.
Okay. Well, firstly, thanks for inviting me. I'm thrilled to be here. So I'm a baby sleep coach. I've worked with parents of babies under the age of 2 for about 10 years. And I'm also an antenatal teacher, like you said. Essentially, I had my children, I was working with teenagers. That was always the field of work that I was in. And I found my antenatal education to be lacking. And I found myself basically posting daily on baby Facebook groups and other kind of platforms asking, why is my baby not sleeping? Why is my baby not following this routine that the book says that they should? Mm-hmm. And I used to drive myself absolutely crazy. And if my baby slept well, I was in a good mood. Right. And if my baby didn't sleep well, I was in like the most horrific mood. And it felt like the success of me as a parent was all based on whether my baby sleeps. Mm-hmm. And that is kind of made worse by the fact that everyone you meet after you've had a baby, one of the first questions out of their mouth is, are they good? Do they sleep?
So true.
Not like, how are you after the birth? How are you finding this big life change? Can I do anything for you?
Yeah.
Are they good? Do they sleep?
Yeah.
And of course, all our babies are good. And now I know, of course, no, none of them sleep because it's not what nature designs, unfortunately for us. So I kind of decided that I didn't want other people to experience kind of the first 6 months that I'd experienced, because I remember once I actually threw the Gina Ford book out of my upstairs window because I was like, it's 8:45, but my baby isn't tired, but you say she should be.
Rigid routine.
Yeah, so I decided to retrain, wrote my own antenatal course, and then also trained to be the baby sleep coach. And then over the years, I've just kind of learned more from more training courses, from being on the job, from working with other professionals. So currently my days are spent either teaching pregnant women about birth and newborn care, or my favourite bit is helping parents get sleep.
I love that.
We all need it.
So what are some of the most common sleep challenges then that families come to you with?
Oh, I mean, there's a whole list. I'd guess the top 3 would be frequent night waking, which, you know, this is all age relevant. So obviously newborns are designed to wake frequently. They've got very small stomachs. They need to eat little and often. And also kind of nature designs it so that they don't really get into deep, long sleeps. And we know from kind of SIDS research that that's not ideal for them, sudden infant death syndrome. So frequent night waking is definitely one that I deal with the most. Needing to be put to sleep in some way. So my baby will only sleep if I hold them, or my baby will only sleep if I feed them. Or I had one woman, bless her cotton socks, her baby needed to be swaddled with a dummy, held, bounced, shushed, all at once in order to get her baby to sleep. And she was just exhausted and her back was hurting her. So she had loads of different crutches.
Gosh, I can imagine.
So, you know, all of that. And then I guess routine is probably the last kind of main one, and that includes everything from when should bedtime be and napping, and this idea of, well, I know my baby should be getting a 2.5 hour lunchtime nap, but they're not. And should is just something that doesn't really exist, to be honest with you. If there was a one size fits all for every baby of every age, you know, we'd leave the hospital with the book and I'd be out of a job. You know, they're all individuals. There is no should. So, yeah, I'd say routine, that's how to put themselves to sleep piece, and the frequent night wakes.
Frequent night wakes. Okay. So let's go on to the nap one there, because I know that's a big one for lots of people, and that was a challenging one for myself, actually. How do we get them to be taking those decent naps? Because to start with, it's quite common, isn't it, that they have the very short 30-minute naps, and you feel so much success that you've just got them to sleep, and then you pour that cup of tea and they're awake.
I know. And it's horrific because all you do when you've got that 30 minutes is you look at your watch and you think, oh, I've only got 20 minutes. Oh, now I've only got 10 minutes. So you waste that 30 minutes anyway, counting
the stress
down.
and the anxiety to fit your whole life into the 30-minute nap.
Yeah, and it's really hard. So the thing with naps is different sleep consultants will use different languages. So some people will talk about sleep pressure, and I go by awake windows because I'm dealing with people who aren't in the sleep, world. And I think sleep pressure just becomes a bit more of a scientific term.
Yeah.
So with naps, the main thing is, firstly, the timing. So it's about working out how long your baby at that particular age can stay awake for before they show signs that they're tired and they're ready to nap. So I have charts on my website. You can Google it. There are loads of sleep charts with kind of average awake windows for the different ages. But what I would always say to parents is it's 50% looking at the clock. So half of you is thinking, right, I have a 4-month-old and I know the average awake window for 4 months is 2 hours. So if they've woken up at 7, then I know around 9 o'clock I'm going to look at the clock, and then the other 50% is looking at them.
Right.
Okay. So I know around 2 hours they may be tired, but I'm going to wait until I see those tired signs before I attempt the nap.
Okay.
Where I think some parents go wrong and they get that nap resistance is that the app says your baby should be sleeping now. They haven't clocked any sleepy cues, but they put them down because, well, that's what the app told them to do. So it's 50% your baby, 50% being aware of the general timings. Okay. So that's the first thing with naps is kind of knowing the set.
Just quickly, what are some of the cues then we want to be looking for?
So it's tricky because an overtired baby, for example, so a baby who's been overtired, napping not very well, waking up a lot at night for a while, will usually not show any signs. So I'll talk in a minute about what you can do with that baby. But general tired signs would be staring. So they just kind of go a bit like hazy, yawning,
right,
eye rubbing, or sometimes a bit of kind of ear pulling. Some babies are just brilliant, and actually their eyebrows go red when they're tired, which is just a super easy cue, but not all babies will do that. So whingy, probably if you're getting to the whingy, the stage, you maybe missed a couple of cues in advance. So the timing and the cues is the first thing. The second thing is wind down time before a nap honestly makes a huge difference.
Interesting.
Again, I think what some parents do, understandably because we're so anxious about naps, is they look at the clock, they look at their baby, they see the yawn and they go, okay, great. And they pick the baby up from their play mat or their jumperoo or whatever it is that they're doing. And within 2 minutes, they've popped them down in the cot, expecting them to just kind of, amazing, I'm just going to nod off to sleep now. But what we need to remember with babies is their brains are working constantly. Everything that they see, they touch, they hear, they feel, it's all creating these neurological pathways in their brain. So they're constantly kind of on the go. We know as women in careers that if we've had an event at night and we're exhausted, maybe we've worked, a 12-hour day, we come home and we're so tired, but we can't go to sleep because we're wired.
So true.
So we have to unwind a little bit. So for your baby that is struggling to fall asleep at nap time, what you would do is you would, at the first sign of tiredness, start to wind them down. So that would look like making sure there's no screens on, making sure any sort of activities that they're playing with aren't noisy and bright. Normally I say it's a really good idea to take them into the room that they're going to be sleeping. Or if you're just kind of in your lounge, close the curtains a little bit, have a snuggle and read a couple of books.
Right.
Yeah, something calming and low level. Change your tone of voice.
Yeah.
Everything should just kind of be less stimulating for them. And read books that are not, lift the flap, press the button, feel the furry stomach books, because we're not trying to trigger the brain.
Yeah.
Read books that are rhythmic or bedtime related. Actually, for the overtired baby that doesn't show the signs, my advice is normally go by the hours, and at 2 hours, do the wind down, because it's often then in the wind down time that you start to see the signs.
Okay.
You know, if a baby has a comforter or a dummy, I'd sometimes say give it to them during the wind down, because they're the cues that it's time to get all kind of relaxed and ready for sleep. So do the wind down time, make sure the lights are dim, put the baby in whatever they're sleeping in, sleeping bag, swaddle, give them a cuddle. And I always, in every plan I write, tell parents, or suggest, I suppose, to parents to sing a lullaby.
Okay.
Day and night, the same song. Because again, it's about the cues, the subconscious to the brain that, this means I should be preparing the body for sleep.
Yeah.
I mean, I still sing my children, and they are 11 and 13, a lullaby before bed.
Yeah.
And they love it. And it's our special time. Sing a lullaby, give them a kiss, and then they can be put down.
Yeah.
So the timing, the wind down, and then the environment itself.
Okay.
It needs to be dark.
Yeah.
Especially if you're getting short naps.
So what age would you be recommending this sort of routine for?
So I don't believe in any sort of planning and setting up routine before the 4-month sleep regression really has happened. So we know that babies up until around 4 months, 75% of their sleep is in light sleep. And so they can often sleep long periods. They don't necessarily do the kind of waking up every sleep cycle, the 30, 40 minutes for naps before that point. And at 4 months, this sleep regression, which we call it a regression because it usually messes up sleep. It's actually a cognitive progression in that now their sleep cycles have changed and become more like ours. So rather than spending kind of most of their time in a similar level of sleep, at 4 months, what happens is they go into a deep sleep. And then just before the next cycle, they come up into the light sleep. And this is the bit where they're more likely to wake.
Yeah.
So I say normally around that stage, because whatever you put in place then is like more likely to stick. And babies aren't born with internal body clocks. There's no circadian rhythm. You know, most babies come out nocturnal because we know when we're pregnant, they're awake a lot more at night when we're laying and doing nothing.
Yeah.
So they don't know the day and night. So I think trying it too soon is just going to cause you stress and anxiety.
Yeah.
And it is not necessary. So I'd say 3 to 4 months.
Okay. So would you say contact napping, is that a bad habit that we want to avoid?
No, I mean, I don't really believe in bad habits. I think when babies are little, they need help in order to be able to sleep. Because in the womb, it's the movement and the bouncing and the noise that's helping them to go off to sleep.
Yeah.
So no, I don't believe in bad habits. What I believe is that if it gets to the point where you are no longer feeling okay with contact naps or feeding to sleep or bouncing to sleep or whatever it is, you know, some parents understandably can just feel touched out. You know, it's that constant body to body.
Yeah, definitely.
So if you feel like that's no longer working for you, it's impacting your mental health, or you've noticed it's actually not working for the baby, because whereas before you were contact napping, once they were asleep, you could put them down maybe and they would stay asleep. Now from 4 months, you might be finding that that's not working. So they wake on the transfer, or they only get another 20 minutes and they wake.
Yeah.
So I guess my line is, if it isn't working for you or your baby, absolutely get some support to fix it. But if it is working for you, if you're happy and your baby's happy, then who am I to tell you that it's a bad habit?
Yeah.
It's not my place.
Okay. So if it's working for you, stick with it. But if you're feeling touched out or the baby's not staying asleep, then you'd recommend
absolutely
having more of a routine where you're perhaps putting them in their own bed with a dark room.
Yeah. Yeah, because these things we know will absolutely help.
Yeah.
But the parent has to be ready for it. Normally, I find that there is just an instinctive correlation between when parents contact me and they're ready and the baby's responding really well, because instinctively the parent knew the baby was ready.
That's interesting.
Yeah, and I do see that a lot.
So what's your view then on using things like white noise? So obviously you recommend blackout blinds, a dark room. Do you find white noise helpful? Does it help to have a routine? Should we be quite hard with that, or is it okay to deviate from it?
I mean, it's always okay to be flexible with routines. We're not robots. Babies aren't robots. I don't really support parents who take 2 weeks out of their life, don't go to a baby class, don't see a person because we're going to fix the sleep in 2 weeks. Because that is just, your mental health is going to suffer.
Yeah.
So there has to be
often
balance.
unrealistic if you've got other children as well. It's not always feasible.
100%. You know, when I work with people with 2 children, the hardest thing is the school runs.
Yeah.
So we have to be flexible around that. I can't give someone a routine that is not going to work with the way that their life works.
Yeah.
So blackout blinds, yes, but only if the baby is struggling to nap in the light. So it's the same principle that I use. If it isn't broken, don't fix it. If your baby can fall asleep in bright light, very happily and nap, then I'm not going to tell you to spend money and put a blackout blind up.
Yeah.
But if your baby's waking really early in the morning because the light's coming in, or if they're short napping, or if they're struggling to fall asleep, then yeah, making it dark, it's just science. When it's dark, the eyes send a message to the brain to produce melatonin. That's our sleepy hormone, and it helps us to fall asleep. Also, the older the baby gets, the more distracted they are. And if we're using a method where parents are staying in the room, you know, and you're stroking and shushing and they're just looking at you, there's no one's falling asleep with someone staring at them.
Yeah.
So that helps as well. So yeah, the darkness. White noise is a really interesting one. You know, they use it in adult sleep clinics. So there's definitely, you know, evidence to say that it helps us to fall asleep. I'm not anti-white noise. I think I don't normally write it into a plan if the parent isn't already using it, unless they've got older children and then they're worried about doing any sort of sleep training and that the crying, which inevitably will be there, waking up their older children, in which case I'd put some outside their room, just kind of try and drown it out. And white noise is a really easy one to get rid of. So normally I say to clients, you know, once you're confident that your baby's cracked it and they're sleeping really well, just every 3 nights, turn the volume down a little bit. Or if you can't turn the volume down on it, put a towel on and then another towel, or move it further away. But what I do want to say about white noise is I don't like the toys. Right.
Why is that?
The owls and the sheeps. Because if white noise works, essentially it's, if we take that sleep pattern and the 4-month-old as an example, they fall asleep listening to shh. Now, if that goes off after 20 minutes, or it's one of the toys that's designed to only come on when there's enough movement or noise, you've missed it. You've missed the cue. So it needs to be constant. And the volume of it shouldn't be any louder than a dishwasher or a washing machine. It's that kind of volume, like some parents crank it right up. But it's not great for their ears.
I've always used one actually, and I found it quite helpful with having 2 older children, certainly with my 1-year-old, because I find she's so used to that it kind of drowns their noise out. They're quite noisy. So if she's going to be napping in the house on a weekend when they're around, very hard to get 2 boisterous boys to be quiet. So
and nor should you have to. Like, they have to live their life. So the white noise does the trick. I really wouldn't worry about that. I mean, some of these habits, they're not all going to be going off to university with their white noise machines and their like sleeping bags and all of this stuff. We get rid of it at some point.
Okay. So that leads me on to the next question. Early rising. I feel like this is a big one for lots of parents. I know I've had 2 children that were 5 a.m. starts to the day, and it's tough. What's your advice? How can we help with that?
Oh my gosh. So I would rather teach a 6-month-old to self-settle than fix a parent's early rising. And I'll tell you why. Basically, early rising, in my professional opinion, is the hardest of any sleep issue to resolve because there are so many variables that cause it. So it's never just one thing. So when we do consultations, like, we really have to delve into everything, and there's a lot of trial and error with early rising. So early rising can be caused by being overtired when you go to bed, so going to bed too late, not being tired enough when you go to bed, too much day sleep, or not enough day sleep. It can be environmental. It can be external. So my child, annoyingly, I had a next door neighbour, not a nice man, who would get up at 4 o'clock every morning, and it was the winter, and he'd turn his engine on to heat his car up and de-ice for about 20 minutes. Right outside my daughter's bedroom window. So she got into the habit of waking up at that time. So after I told him politely, please, can you not do that? She was then wired. So then I had to do all this stuff with her to change it. So sometimes it's that, the bin men or someone in the house getting up. So it's not so easy because we have to then look at everything.
Yeah.
So with early rising, it's about check the routine. In that, we'll come back to that question about rigid versus non-rigid routines as well in a minute.
Okay, yeah.
So with early rising, we need to check the routine, making sure that the sleep's appropriate, definitely making sure they're not going to bed too late. Then we also need to check what's happening in the morning when the baby wakes. So you work on the routine and everything you can see that might result in making improvements. But then it's also how you respond to it. So if you go in, pick them up, give them a feed in the hope to put them back to sleep, and I'm talking about babies who don't need that feed, you're just reinforcing the early wake because we're giving them calories.
Right.
If you go in and out and in and out and there's lots of crying and upset, again, you're just reaffirming that wake up time because it's so stimulating at that time. If you go in and give them toys to play with quietly or iPads or whatever, reinforcing it. Really the best way to do it, if you're confident or the consultant you're working with is confident that the daytime routine is right, is wait until they're upset. So no need to go back in if they're playing and happy. Once they're upset, I would go into the room and I would stay the entire time. If you can get them to kind of lay down in the cot and you can stroke them or gently sing them a lullaby. If that's impossible because they're so upset, then sit on a chair in their room and just cuddle them. Not too much talking, no storybooks, no lights on. Then when it gets to what you would consider, what I would consider a normal morning time, which is 6 a.m., not 7. Then I would leave the room for literally 10 seconds, come back in, good morning, open the curtains, expose them to all that natural light. If you've got a garden and it's this time of year, I'd go for a little wander around the garden. So you're keeping everything dark and unstimulated up until the point that it is now morning. And the reason that I recommend leaving, and this would only be with babies maybe over 9 months, is because what you don't want them to think is you've given up and just made it morning because they haven't gone back to sleep. You're basically differentiating. Everything that happened before I left the room was still night.
Right.
I've left, I've come in. Yeah, I'm frustrated with you, but I'm not taking that out on you. I'm bright and breezy. It's the morning.
Yeah.
And I'm going to open the curtains then.
So they get used to that ritual of the difference between the night and the day.
Yeah, trying to reset their body clock. Now, all of that said, some babies are just early birds. They are 10-hour sleepers at night and nothing you do is going to change that.
Yeah.
Sometimes we just have to accept it. And it's so interesting because I'll work with clients for 2 weeks trying to fix early rising. And sometimes it's rare, but sometimes we haven't really got it where we wanted it to be. And on the very last call, the dad will say, oh yeah, my mum said I always woke up early. Oh, well, that would have been useful to know at the start because some of these sleep things are hereditary. But those are the things we definitely try. There is another technique you can use, by the way, which I'll share with your listeners. It's a really scary one to do. But if you've got a habitual wake, so the example of my daughter with the annoying next door neighbour, because hers was so to the second, it was 4:20 every morning, you can try and break that habitual wake. And you do it by going in at another point in their sleep and rousing them.
Right.
So this is why it's scary because we don't want to wake them up, right? So people call it wake to sleep. I call it rouse to sleep. We're not waking them. So I normally say do it when you go to bed at night. So let's say it's like 10:30 p.m.
Yeah.
Imagine that you'd left your mobile phone in a drawer in their bedroom. And you're like, oh no, I've left it in. And you sneak in and you open the drawer and it creaks. And the baby shifts and you go, don't wake up. Yeah. Don't wake up. And they just kind of sigh and roll over and go to sleep. That's what you're trying to do.
Okay.
Because then what we're doing is we're bringing them from a deep sleep into a light sleep. And that's going to start a new sleep cycle, which means that hopefully when they get to 4:20, they're in a different place of that cycle So that can break the habitual wake.
Okay. And that can be done at any point in the night, can it?
Yeah, any point. I used to do it kind of 40 minutes before they normally wake.
Right.
And I always kind of assumed that was the only way that the method would work. And I was feeling really guilty telling parents to set alarm clocks for kind of 3 a.m.
Yeah.
So I tried it at more kind of between 10, 11 o'clock at night, and it can still have the same results.
Still works.
Yeah.
Okay. That's interesting. Yeah, because I'd heard it needed to be done about 40 minutes before they wake.
No, it doesn't. It's really just about finding a time when they're in a very deep sleep.
Okay.
And bringing them in out of it and not waking them. And so this is why it's so scary, isn't it?
Yeah.
Because you don't want to wake them up at 11 o'clock and then they're up for an hour because they've startled.
So true. Yeah, it's a tough one, isn't it?
Yeah.
And like you say, though, two of my children were 5 a.m. no matter what I did, tried many of the sort of techniques you said there, but they would always go to bed earlier. So we could get an early night in them if we needed more sleep.
Yeah.
But even if they had a late night, really late night, like on nights of travel and things like that, 5 o'clock.
Yeah.
Just would never kind of go past
But then it's better, isn't it? I often say this to clients. It's better that they go to bed at 6 till 5 and have 11 hours, that you push them till 7 and then they're only having 10.
Yes.
Because sleep does breed sleep.
Yeah.
You know, the more overtired we are, the worse our nights and the earlier our mornings are going to be. So giving that extra hour of sleep is really
Absolutely.
what you need to do.
And I'd really notice it in my kids, in their mood. You can really tell if they have that extra hour. An hour makes a big difference, I think.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's go back to the question about where we were talking about routine, rigid routine.
Oh, yes. So routine. My take on routine is some sort of structure for you and your baby is definitely helpful. You know, I have a lot of clients who the first thing that they say or the reason why they've come to me is, I can't plan my day. Really want to sign up to this baby class or this massage class, and I can't because I never know when my baby's going to be sleeping.
Yes.
So the way that I approach routine is aim for a 12-hour day, roughly, and a 12-hour night, roughly.
Okay.
Give or take an hour. So if we are always waking our babies within the same hour, and they're always going to bed within the same hour, then we know their naps are always going to come roughly within the same hour in those kind of awake window gaps. So if they wake up at 7, we know they're going to nap if they're 4 months around 9. But if they wake up at 6, they're going to nap around 8. And their bedtime will be 6 instead of 7 on that day because everything's pushed.
Yeah.
So give about an hour in between, you know, and this is all give or take because remember we're watching those signs. But if you have a baby that sometimes they've had a bad night, so you let them sleep till 9, sometimes they wake up at 6 or sometimes they wake up at 8, then you're basically dealing with somebody who's like a high flyer who goes to New York and then London and they've got no body clock. So then you can't expect any sort of routine because it's not, you haven't set one for them.
So would you recommend waking them, having a set point if they've not woken naturally by that point?
If you want structure and routine, yes. And I normally set that with the parent. So we look at the average. So if your baby is usually waking between 5 and 6, then I'd probably say by 6:30 wake them. And if they're usually waking between 6 and 7, I'd say by 7:30 wake them. So again, it's flexible. So that's the first thing with routine. And then the second thing is that things go wrong. Not every day is going to be the same.
Yeah.
You know, we have to balance ourselves and what we need and our babies and what they need. And it's very hard as a new parent. This new guilt switch in our brain clicks in.
Yeah.
I'm hoping that, you know, the film that they do with the inside, what's it called? Inside Out.
Yeah.
And they talk about the teenage girl and the emotions. I'd love them to do a parent one because guilt would be the thing.
Absolutely. You're so right.
That clicks in.
Yeah.
Because we feel guilty anytime we put ourselves seemingly before our children. But remember, if you're not happy and if your mental health isn't good, you're not going to be the best parent you can be anyway. So if going to the music class is as much for you as it is for the baby, and they've fallen asleep at 9 and the music class you have to leave at 10, just wake them up. Yeah, and if they have a short nap that day, it really doesn't matter.
Yeah.
You allow them to have a bit longer if they want it, or just put bedtime a little bit earlier. So I also don't agree with all naps having to be at home in the cot either.
Yeah.
I think that's really trapping for parents.
So what would you recommend?
I would say if you're trying to sort out routine and if one of your goals is to teach them how to fall asleep in their cot, then at least one nap a day should be in the cot. And I normally recommend the morning nap for 2 reasons. One, it's the easiest one to teach because babies wake up still quite tired. And 2, it's the one where we're normally at home anyway.
Yeah.
But you definitely don't need to be coming home and spending, a long lunchtime nap and then another nap if you don't want to. If that works for you, brilliant. If going for a walk, I've had clients who've had so many dogs, and they have to dog walk. So they're happy for all the babies' naps to be in the pram.
Right.
Well, that's fine.
Yeah.
I'm not going to tell you shouldn't do that.
Yeah.
There's nothing wrong with that. Good, fresh
What
air.
about if your baby doesn't nap as long in the buggy as they would do in the cot?
Yeah, that's a really tough one. I can pretty much teach any baby to sleep in a cot. I can't teach a baby to sleep in a pram. They either do or they don't.
Yeah.
And it's normally the active babies or the babies that are quite kind of sensitive to light and noise that don't sleep so well.
Yeah.
The ones with like fear of missing out, the nosy babies.
I've had them. I find they'll fall asleep,
but
you'll never get more than 30 minutes.
Yeah.
So it's fine on occasion, but obviously if you're doing that every day, we end up in a massive sleep debt.
Yeah.
So I find I've always had to have a certain amount of routine for them to sleep in their cot to get good sleep, those good 2-hour naps.
Yeah, so then you might look at your week and say, on a Tuesday and Thursday when I've got a class, that'll just be pram naps on the way.
Yeah.
But on the other days, I can be at home and you just find a balance that works for you. Snooze shades are a great product.
Yeah.
They don't conduct the heat. They're breathable. They make it dark. You can get little white noise machines, or if you put your phone on airplane mode, it'll still play a white noise app.
Yeah.
The rocket is one of the inventions that I love. I wish I'd invented it.
Yeah.
The like zhuzh for the pram. Things like that can help. But I would be saying once they wake up after 30 minutes, keep the snooze shade. Keep walking for 20. So it takes on average, once a baby's woken, about 20 minutes to get back sleepy enough to go back to nap. And I think sometimes we give up too soon.
Yeah.
So as long as they're not crying, I'd just keep pushing the pram.
Okay,
or
it's interesting to know.
If you know they're going to wake up 30 minutes on a walk, at 25 minutes, make sure you are walking and you're not sitting having a coffee.
Yeah.
Just when they
Still
get into
got
that light
motion.
sleep, the motion's going to push them to stay asleep.
Yeah. Okay, all helpful tips there. Okay, so another one that I find comes up, how does teething and illness kind of affect sleep? Because that's one I find you just start to get into a routine, they get ill or the teeth are coming through and there's just always something.
Always something. So teething can definitely impact sleep. It's painful. I've just been cutting a wisdom tooth. And I can't tell you how painful it's been.
Wow. Yeah.
So there's stuff you can give for teething. You've got your kind of paracetamol, Nurofen, baby-friendly versions. Not all parents like giving that type of medication to their children, which I completely respect. There's homeopathic granules and gels and these amber anklets, which I would recommend. And amber's meant to emit a natural pain relief when it gets warm.
Right.
I wouldn't recommend the necklaces, and I would only recommend babies sleep in an anklet if they're enclosed in a sleeping bag.
Okay.
Because we don't want them kind of grabbing it and putting it into their mouth because it's a choking risk.
So true.
So there are things that you can use for teething. The signs that a baby is teething are clear. They dribble a lot, thick saliva, like they're going to wet through their T-shirt, their vest, whatever they're wearing. Their cheeks go red. And sometimes you'll notice their poos they might look a bit kind of mucousy.
Right.
And they might get some nappy rash. And that's because they're swallowing all the excess saliva and that's acidic and it's irritating the skin. So ear pulling as well. So I think that there are clear signs. So give them something, to help with the pain management. And then I guess my line with teething or illness is it depends on the extent. I'm never going to say to a parent whose baby has a temperature and a virus to do any of the sleep, practices that I recommend. You do whatever your baby needs until they're better.
Yeah.
But if they're just little colds, they're still able to go out. If they're colds or teething, then I say if you've worked really hard to teach them to put themselves to sleep, and if you've worked really hard on that, give them as much support as they need, but maybe see if you can try that at the point they fall asleep, they're in the cot. you know, because the sad bit is that when you spend 2 weeks kind of making all of these positive changes, and then the next week they're in your bed for a week because they're poorly, which I understand, but then you have to go right back to the start.
Yeah.
So it's parent judgment, obviously, but give more support. But at the very least, if they can fall asleep with you there, with you supporting them, but in the cot, you're less likely to regress the progress that you've made.
Okay, that's a good point.
Yeah.
All right. And then that takes me on to one which, again, I think is a big one for everyone, which is the dummy. How do you feel about dummies?
I mean, I guess it doesn't matter how I personally feel about dummies. As a sleep consultant, dummies can be great up until a point. So we know that sometimes when babies are born prematurely, they're given dummies to help strengthen their suck reflex. We know that sucking a dummy can help with pain management as well. But obviously, the longer the baby has the dummy, we're talking about teeth development and speech development. There's some research to say that there are more ear infections with dummy babies. So there are concerns for the longevity of them. Reflux babies, also dummies, are really helpful for reflux because it helps with the kind of soothing and the swallowing. So if you want to use a dummy, use a dummy.
Yeah.
The Lullaby Trust, who do all of the research into safe sleep, would say, or at least they used to say, I need to double check that they still talk about consistency, but their line used to be that if you're using a dummy, use it consistently rather than kind of just some naps. The same with swaddling. It's best if you're kind of consistent with it. But at 6 months, generally the advice is, or between 6 months and 12 months, take the dummy away to avoid that speech delay and the teeth issue. From a sleep point of view, the dummies will start usually, not all, I'd say probably about 80% of the clients I've worked with dummies, from around 4 months, start causing more problems than they help.
Okay.
Because everything we've been talking about, baby falls asleep with the dummy, dummy falls out, baby comes into light phase of sleep, starts to, it's not there, wakes up, cries, needs the dummy.
Yeah.
So at 6 months, it's considered safe to take the dummy away. If you decide to keep the dummy because it's not causing night wakes, but you're finding yourself doing, well, then you find yourself doing dummy runs.
Yeah.
So you go in, baby's crying, maybe they're 9 months at this age, and you have to find the dummy and pop it in the mouth. Then it's about teaching them to find and the dummy themselves. So I do a lot of work with parents who choose to keep the dummy on removing them from the dummy issue. And we do that by first few nights, baby wakes, find where the dummy is in the cot, take it and just pop it in their hand. And they can do that. As long as we're working with a baby of an age where they've got this ability. Then after a few nights of that, we find the dummy, we put it close to them, we just tap it. It's there if you want it.
Okay.
And then they reach it. And then we go to wherever the dummy is, we just tap it.
Yeah.
We're basically teaching them to do this in the night.
Giving them the skill.
To find it. I'd play games in the day. So I'd take the dummy and hide it under something. And then I'd go, who can get it first? To teach the skill of doing it. Because then they can find their dummy themselves and you can just sleep.
Yeah.
So it's not for me to recommend to keep or to lose it, but I do have a lot of conversations where I say the reason that your baby's waking up frequently is because of the dummy after I've done a full consultation. So if you want to see improvements, the only way we're going to see that is to either teach them to find it themselves, which they have to be over a certain age for the physical skills to do that, or we're going to have to take it away. Yeah. And then it's up to the parents what they choose to do.
And if you take it away, how long does it tend to take?
The way that I do it, it's about 3 days.
Okay.
And then they forget it ever existed. To be honest, I mean, I don't work with children over 2 currently. The older they are, often the harder it can be because of the understanding. And then you have to bring the dummy fairy in, or you do your reward charts or whatever. There's so many different methods.
Yeah.
Whereas when they're little, they just forget and relearn so quickly.
Yeah. So self-settling or self-soothing, whatever the term is, what's your views on it, and when can we expect babies to learn the skill?
Okay. So good question. there are so many different sleep consultants around, and everybody uses different terms, like I mentioned, awake windows or sleep pressure. So I can only go with the terms that I use and my understanding of those terms. And I'm always very clear with clients. When I say this is what I mean. Self-soothing, to me, is a baby who's left upset to sort themselves out, to soothe themselves. Self-settling, to me, is a baby who knows how to put themselves to sleep. So I don't use the term self-soothing. I use self-settling. Now, we also talk about sleep training. It's not training, it's teaching. But I don't use that term because it's not a term that anyone really has an understanding of. And so I use sleep training. With self-settling, I wouldn't start working with a baby to teach self-settling before 6 months. Maybe from around 4 months if the parent was really, really having very broken nights and, was just on the edge, then I would support them. We all have the capacity to be able to put ourselves to sleep, okay? But it's still a learnt experience, just like walking. So when we learn to walk, we don't get up one day and just walk across the room. Right? We take a step or two and then we fall on our bum. And we might cry. And then we're like clapped and encouraged and we might take another one. And then we get to that stage, you may remember with your little ones, where they'll hold our hand, but the minute we let go, they'll sit.
Yes.
Because they're scared of falling.
Yes.
Okay? So it takes time to learn it. Exactly the same with sleep. There is so much negative attention on sleep training and self-settling or self-soothing. But I think what you have to understand, or what parents, I hope, can understand, is there's a huge difference between placing a baby down, leaving the room, and them crying it out. There's also a huge difference between that and another method called controlled crying, which I also don't use, which would be putting the baby down, leaving for 5 minutes, coming back to let them know that you're there and they're okay, and leaving for 10 minutes, coming back and leaving. I also don't use that method.
Okay.
Because what I believe is, and what I know from 10 years, is that you never have to leave your baby alone to scream in order for them to learn how to fall asleep.
Right.
Okay. And we've talked a lot in this podcast about being wound down and being calm. You can't learn anything when you're in that level of
so
stress. But to say that crying is bad is false in my opinion. And to say that sleep training can only be done by leaving a baby alone to cry and being non-responsive is false in my opinion. The analogy that I use a lot with my clients is when my youngest Poppy, she's my last child, so I admit I baby her a lot. We like to keep our little ones little, don't we? And we got the letter before she started school, and one of the things on it was, please encourage your children to learn how to self-dress. They're going to have PE. And she used to have an absolute meltdown if I asked her to put her shoes on. So we hadn't gotten to the stage where she could put her shoes on. When I decided to woman up, and she really needs to learn to do this herself, I didn't put her in a room with her shoes, close the door and say, you're not coming out until your shoes are on.
Yeah.
To me, that would be cry it out. What I did do is I sat next to her on the stairs and I said to her, I'm not going to do this for you, but I'm here and I'll explain what to do and I'll show you and you're going to do it. She still had an absolute meltdown. I didn't leave her alone. I didn't get stressed. I didn't shout at her. Next day, when she had to do it again, half the time of the meltdown, and then the meltdown's gone. That's how I see my approach to sleep training. It is no longer my job to put you to sleep. If I've made that decision as a parent, it is always my job to reassure you if you're upset and to let you know that I am there. And you can do that and still allow them to learn the skill. What I don't agree with is people who say, well, they'll learn it when they're ready. How can you learn something if the opportunity is taken away from you? How can I learn to walk if every time I'm left to do it, I cry, my mum picks me up?
So true.
I can't.
Yeah, so true.
So some of the more kind of gentle, as they would call themselves, sleep coaches or consultants, honestly, what are they giving you? They're just telling you what you're doing is normal, carry on as normal. And that's fine if that's fine with you. But if you're up every 45 minutes and you're absolutely exhausted and you're being told, well, I'm sorry, this is just what you have to do and this is normal. And I know that you can fix that without having to leave your baby alone to cry.
Yeah.
That's the message I'm trying to get across.
Yeah.
And also, I'm not saying there won't be tears, but there's a massive difference between a baby crying alone and a baby crying with someone.
Yes.
You know, the other thing I often say to parents is imagine that your 1-year-old was at a birthday party and they had a piece of chocolate cake. And then they have a massive meltdown, screaming because they want a second piece. I'd love to think that just because we're not meant to let our babies cry, you don't give them another piece of chocolate.
You're so
cake,
right, yeah.
right?
Yeah.
We know that we have to like have boundaries. So why does crying in one situation seem appropriate, but crying in another situation is being seen to be cruel and mean? There's just so much misunderstanding about the field. You know, it's not a regulated field. Parents, when they're approaching sleep consultants to work with, really need to do their due diligence. They really need to ask, you know, what experience do you have? What training do you have? Can I speak to a few clients who've worked with you? What methods do you use? You know, I'm very honest and clear with the clients that call me for inquiry calls because they're parting with, you know, we're not cheap, considerable amount of money, you know, really putting their heart and soul into something. And it's important that matches up with the person that you're working with. So just, don't just go on a friend's recommendation. I'd say always do a bit more research and always have a chat to the consultant before you pay any money. You know, most of us offer free calls because I also get quite close to the clients. We're speaking every day. I you know, talk to their partners, sometimes grandparents, whoever's involved. You need to click.
Yes,
you need that relationship. It's a vulnerable time.
Yes,
for everybody. So I think it's really important that your listeners, your viewers,
I think that's a really valid point. What you've raised there is, I think, when we think about leaving a baby to cry, we almost think about leaving them to cry, period. And what you're saying is that we don't have to do that, but it doesn't mean that there isn't a time and a place when they need to learn the skill and have some practice with your support.
Absolutely.
That a small bit of crying, like if in a different situation that they were having a tantrum and we were holding that boundary so they could learn a skill, can be appropriate.
Of course. When that child wants that second piece of chocolate cake, we don't just walk off and leave them alone.
Yeah.
You know, we try and reassure them and explain that they're not, but they're okay.
Yeah.
But we don't stop the crying by shoving the chocolate cake in their mouth.
No.
Otherwise, we're just going to have children who just learn to whinge and cry to get what they want.
So true.
Now, this isn't what's happening in sleep because they're not manipulating us. They're crying because they're tired and they don't know how to go to sleep. They just don't know how to do it until they've experienced it.
Yeah.
But as long as we're there's no negative learning taking place about abandonment or misattachment or anything. Crying is just their way of communicating. I'm exhausted. Well, so am I. That's why we're doing it.
And you're so right. I mean, we have to advocate for our own needs as parents to a degree in all of this as well.
100%.
And if you have a baby that is relentlessly waking, you cannot function. You cannot be the best version of yourself. And you might be having other children that you need to parent, and it's not fair on them either.
Yeah, and do not feel guilty for that because our self-help and our mental health is hugely important and impactful on our children's experience of life too. So advocate for yourself.
Brilliant. Lovely, Vikki. Have you got any other final thoughts for our listeners today?
I guess my final thought for your listeners would be, don't ever feel pressure to do something that you don't feel comfortable with. Remember, there is no should. So if you're talking to your friends and their babies are sleeping differently to yours and they're like, well, you should now be doing this. Absolutely not. Seek help when you feel the time is right for you, not when you feel it's society's norm to have a baby doing X, Y, and Z. Always go with, how are you and how is your baby? That's the first question to ask yourself. Am I happy? Is my partner happy? Are my children happy? And if the answer to all of that is yes, you don't need to do anything. But if the answer to that is no, then there's support out there if you wish to find it.
Lovely. Well, thank you. It's been an absolute pleasure to have you on the podcast.
My first ever podcast.
Oh, amazing. Well, you've done amazingly
Thank
well
you.
and so much practical, helpful advice. And I could not stop thinking about my 1-year-old through that and what I'm going to go home and try out. So
Good.
thank you.
Good luck.
Thank you.